right, this is going to be another episode of Counterpoints, the last of 2023. Look, assuming they get this out in time. Normally it comes out the day afterwards. So in theory, it will be the last one of 2023, even though normally, I don't know how people do it now. I feel like in the modern day, mate, without sounding like a boomer, right? I know already as an adult, Christmas is different from like the normal child experience. Like, for example, my joke is like when you're a kid, you really do think Christmas is like 2 weeks long, isn't it? Whereas now I get the feeling people have tried to go the other way and they've tried to reduce it to like just the 25th or something. Because I have to say, I hope everyone watching this episode knows this is basically our Christmas gift to you, because it's the 27th that we're recording this on. Like, where I come from, you don't, once the 25th comes, you don't do anything until like the new year at that point in time. Like, you just sitting at home in pajamas, like the meme, in pajamas, eating leftovers, watching shit on TV. Like, unironically, that's what I would be doing right now. So I hope people appreciate that we actually have, you know, dragged ourselves out of bed, made ourselves look presentable, and we're now going to attempt to do some quality work to end 2023, Maniac.
Exactly. I mean, listen, I think as a freelancer, Christmas and New Year is kind of a period where you can go through admin stuff, like the boring, like you don't have to work on camera. You can take a bit of time to work around. So yeah, no, my Christmas is pretty much 2 family dinners, a little bit of TV, and then right back to work, content, preparing, you know, the grind never stops, all of that.
But I thought what we could do is, since obviously everyone's thinking, like, obviously HLTV starts up the bandwagon for the top 20. I think that starts in a day or two, and they obviously start with the 20th and go day by day by day. I thought what we should do is we'll do a little, like, sort of, we'll mix in our analysis with some review of 2023 type stuff, because I actually think another area that a show like this could be really useful is, I always experience this with all my other podcasts, is it's not that I'm like blaming the public, but because the public don't, you know, like here's the analogy, Maniac, right? So elsewhere on LFN, the Last Free Nation Network, I actually do a show with Richard Lewis and Monte Cristo where we just review old movies, basically. We go back, all of us, we watch a movie. It's like a book club, essentially, but we're movies. And then we appear, you know, we have like a little meet up and then we just discuss what we thought, you know, we think of the director. And what you find is, even if you know the movie and you've watched the movie many times, the experience of watching it expressly to take notes and then have a conversation, it's actually akin, you'll see where I'm going with the analogy, to when you work the event. When you work the event and you're watching the game, you're not watching it in the same way as I watch the game while I'm not at the event and you guys are there and I'm watching it on a second monitor while I play League of Legends or something, or talk to someone on Discord. Like, I'm watching it in a way more passive way at home, whereas, yeah, you know, like, you're so activated, you remember it in a different way. So one of the problems with being a casual fan is, most of the memories when I ask you about a player are just the last tournament you saw, or maybe if you've got a pretty good memory, let's say the last 2 or 3 months, you might remember, like, for example, most fans watching this show, you're going to have a pretty good memory of the CS2 tournaments, but as soon as I start saying CSGO, it's already going to get a bit blurry. Like, if I tell you, remember that Pro League was actually the last CSGO tournament, you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute, oh, yeah, that's right, and then, but then, like, Mouse won it, but then Navi was, but wait, Simple was still in Navi. It's already going to get complicated, right? So this is all to say, the main problem I think you have as a casual fan is at the end of a year, you are going to have a really hard time remembering what the first 6 months was like. And so when it comes to things like who was the player of the year or the team of the year, I feel like it's not even that people are idiots. I feel like they just have a hard time keeping it all in mind at once. I mean, I know, I'll set you up like this. I know when you were trying to figure out your top 20 for Twitter, like who your players would be, one of the problems is, beyond your own memories, you do end up doing stuff like just looking at stats and then trying to figure out, like, right, so if he has similar stats, but then he's in a team like you were doing, like, he doesn't play as much of a starring role, and you're trying to do, like, sort of an equation in your mind mixed with memories of it. It's tricky to figure these things out, right? Because we can summon all these memories, but you're trying to do, like, you're trying to be such a big picture approach, right?
No, absolutely. I think when you put together like a top 20 the way I did it intuitively, I think it starts with acknowledging that you do not remember everything correctly. Just straight up. Like, you don't. Like, you have biases, whether it's recency or any of the other issues that you might have. Whatever I think at first sight is never going to be my end result. Like, this is how I imagine the ranking is going to be. Go dive to the stats and then go look back at previous tournaments, beginning of the year tournaments, and then be like, oh, right, like he was pretty good at that time. And then always be a little bit self-critical about how you feel about a player. I think the greatest example is like Simple. Simple is the greatest example for that if you're looking at 2023, because you might just look at the game and be like, no, he disappeared. He closed the doors. That's it. Why would he even be in a top 10? And then you actually take a minute to look at these numbers, look at the placings he's done throughout the years, throughout the months rather, and there is a very strong case. So you kind of have to be a little bit humble with what you think you know about how a player was doing, and then have a little bit of patience. But I mean, personally, I'm kind of a nerd for that. I kind of enjoy it. Like I enjoy the memory trip, going back to tournaments, see like how player was doing, who ended up where, playoffs or not. Like this is a fun journey that I appreciate going through.
Yeah, I actually think you nailed the perfect example there, which is if someone only remembers CS2, well, we all know Simple never played CS2. So it actually feels like, and I've seen a lot of comments like this, dude, there's people acting like Simple's not even going to be in the HLTV top 20. No. It's like, you are aware, guys, he's probably going to be top 10. Like, when you go and actually look, it's more just like, yes, look, we obviously have to take into account he hasn't played since then. So, for example, his numbers might have stayed artificially high if he had good results in, like, I think it was around the spring to the summer, he was still good. But the problem is, like, I don't think people realize, like, probably the most interesting thing, actually, if you look statistically this year, is aside from Ziwu, man alive, it's wide open. There's actually loads of room for us all to paint with our canvas and decide what reasons why people are top or they're not. In fact, you even look at the players, Maniac, it's all the bloody roles even mixed up. Like, I've got to say, I don't know what happened this year, but it's sort of actually produced an interesting mix of players. Like, as much as, like, you could go, there's a lot of star riflers. It's like, there's every type, though, mate. There's the lurker, there's the entry guy, there's the fucking middle of the round guy. There's every type of, it's actually, I actually think we're pretty wide open. So, look, we're not going to do a whole top 20 here, obviously. But I thought we could do stuff like who's the player of the year, who's in the contention for you, and then obviously we can talk around that. So, like, look, should we get the obvious one out of the way, which is I'm going to guess Ziwu's player of the year, right?
Yeah, I don't even think the debate could even be discussed. Like, there's no debate. Like, it's his year. 2023 is this year. He has the MVPs. He's got the major. He's got the wins. He's statistically a good mile ahead of anybody. There are maybe a few stats if you're looking for AWP kills per round where he's a bit behind, but I personally, I don't think there is even a discussion to be had. It's his year. Would I say he played better than last year? I think that would be an interesting conversation in itself, but I do think 2023 is fully Ziwu's. And then the interesting debate sort of starts after that, if you agree.
I mean, the thing for me with the Ziwu one is people will forget that last year, much like every year where he wasn't number one, it's usually because he had like a period of the year. It's usually at the beginning, you'll notice around the spring, where he'll have a little bit of a slump. Now, look, I'll use the Aaron Rodgers line from the NFL, where what happened was Aaron Rodgers had a year, right? He's like a star quarterback, where his numbers weren't quite as good. But the joke was, and he even said this line, he was like, yeah, but you notice my down year looks like some people's career year. So it's the same joke. Like when we say like, Ziwu wasn't as good, like first of all, he was number 2. And then secondly, the stats are like, you know, like Robs would take that tomorrow as his next year's stats. So we are talking about, you know, like expectations, obviously, are part of what's attenuating this. But then the other thing I would say is I actually think this year he has to be better this year, because I don't think there was a weak point this year, mate. Like I pointed out, he hadn't had many prestige tournaments where he had the big run. Obviously, he eventually had the major. But then again, this year we only had 3 prestige events. We had a major in Cologne and Katowice. And by the way, I actually think when we get maybe a little bit further down the list, one of the problems is because G2 only won those 2 prestige events and then fuck all else, they weren't even in finals. I actually think it gets really complicated if you go for accomplishments this year. That's why I say the good news about the fact there's like 1 million people with like a 1.18 rating is, why don't we just, all right, just talk about who's the best and then figure it out based on like the team roles and stuff. So yeah, I agree. The Ziwu one's a pretty obvious one. I'm not someone who just like worships stats, but I do think when you are that far ahead in stats, and then you look, this is probably going to help also with the Nico rating, I'm sure. When you also then look and know that actually Ziwu isn't playing the most selfish possible Counter-Strike where he's just at the back with an AWP picking people off. He's not doing like James things where he saves and gets 2 kills or whatever. Like, he's even with an entry on T-side with a fucking AK running in. Like, if you saw that Shox interview I did, they said that when Shox used to be in Vitality, literally, Extaz used to actually shout at Ziwu, like, can you stop fucking going first? Like, let someone else go first, and then they'll like let you set up for the rest of the round, because they thought like this guy's just wasted himself like cannon fodder. So I actually think people don't realize as well, like, his numbers are insane, like basically impossible. Like, look, no one's even close this year, but we also know, like, actually, he's played a pretty well-rounded game this year. In the past years, it was that ridiculous meme of, like, it was always Ziwu until Spink's game. No, like, proper second star in terms of production. You'd have very good players, like veteran French players, like Shox, etc. But this one guy had to, like, put the majority of the production, and then that was just the way it was. Like, this time around, it really is like he does any roles he wants. He's all all over the place. He's good on all sides of the game. In fact, there's how we can start tying it into some of the game, mate. Is I saw this in this Blast World final because the game that was interesting, obviously, was the Nuke one, just like the previous one, the Blast Fall final, right? Mate, in these games, there's times actually where even though it's supposed to be the dominant side, I've noticed when Vitality's on CT side of Nuke, dude, they're not actually that crazy good. Like, there's a lot of holes to their game. But every time someone gets, like, FaZe Clan and they're doing a run against them on CT side of Nuke, where Zero just fucking keeps you in the game. Like, this guy, because it's like simple back in the day, he can just rotate wherever he is. He's always going to be there. You always have to essentially win a duel against him. Because that's so hard, like, it just shows me, like, that even though people are seeing the MVPs, this is actually, like, where I really think MVP comes in. It's like, there's a concept from basketball like this, which is like all points in basketball aren't equal because everyone knows as a competitor, Maniac, the psychological feeling of when, like, you're in, like, a drought, like, you can't get a basket. The point is, my analogy for what a superstar is the superstar's the guy you really can't just pass the ball to and sort of say, like, make some magic happen, mate. Like, at the moment, you know, nothing's working, the offense is fucked, like, this guy's having issues, maybe confidence is just... If we just give you the ball, though, you do your shit. That's what Zero does, mate. Like, other people, like Rops, maybe they go up and down with their team. Nico does seem like things affect him. Doesn't Zero just turn up pretty much every game? I might have my disputes to whether he's, like, hit his peak in a game, but, man, lie, it's pretty rare that he has a bad... Like, the joke is, it's so rare he has a bad game that they're all memorable. You can, like, remember the 5 big ones he ever has a year, right?
I know. And this is where I have a problem if you're trying to judge Zywoo in isolation. This is where I have a problem, and you can give me your opinion on that too. Because now I feel like people are making the argument that Zywoo is finally showing up in semis and finals and having these incredibly pivotal moments where he just wins you an incredible round and then everyone is back in the game and then Vitality finally win. And if you look at the stats and if you look at key series in playoffs, the numbers, they back up that claim. Like, he's had incredible series in playoffs, incredible grand finals, incredible semis and whatever. I do wonder to what extent this is only Zywoo playing better, or to what extent now the rest of the team is capable on banking, capitalizing on these rounds that he wins, and then, you know, creating another momentum. You're talking about the spawn of Spinks as this second force. This is sometimes complicated to kind of entangle, right? Is this just Zywoo playing incredibly much better? Or is it just that, yes, he creates these moments, but then the rest of the team is kind of able to pick up the ball and then go ahead and score for the team as well? This is where I kind of struggle. In isolation, incredible year for Zywoo in 23. Very, very hard to poke holes. I agree with you. Even Katowice, Cologne, the numbers are great. Even if the trophy isn't here, the rest of the year is incredible. The playoffs rating are incredible. But then I also feel like it's hard to objectively look at how much of these trophies are just Zywoo being incredible and how much is the cast, like from coast to coast, be kind of able to capitalize on the opportunities that he creates, because that's what a superstar does. A superstar creates opportunities for your team to kind of get momentum and then win rounds. And I think now Vitality also has or had more assets to kind of jump on these opportunities. So I struggle a little bit with that. It's not really a close topic in my mind, but definitely an incredible year for him.
Okay, let's do it then, because obviously it's basically after number one that it can immediately get spicy. Like, this really is a year. I think last year was like this too, where if people want to make the argument, I think you can go 3 or 4 different ways here. It depends on, again, like I say, pure stats aren't going to help you on this one, not least because actually the other thing that you have to point out as well compared to past years is it feels like there are way fewer tier 1 tournaments. Like, what was that stat on Reddit where they said that, like, Zywoo had been the MVP at like 5 events, but he'd only attended like 11 or something ridiculous.
Yeah,
like, dude, that's crazy to think 11 events in a year. Because in my mind, like, you do like 20 events in a year. That's why if you're the teams with the eras back in the day, you win like 8 or 9 events. Like, it's actually why I think another problem we have in the same way as in CS2, people aren't used to MR12. So it's taken a while to know what number is equivalent to like a 30 bomb, for example. I think in the same way, people really get lost on that aspect too. Like, they don't realize, like, it's not the same circuit as before the online era. Like, we actually have shrunk it a little bit. So I actually think there's another factor also, by the way, why I think the Zywoo one's pretty hard to debate against. Like, unless you're just going to go by some factor, like you want the person who won the most clutches or something, like every other factor says that Zywoo was the best player at the majority of the tournaments this year. And that, by the way, that would be if he hadn't have won. And the team did win most of them as well. So it's pretty hard to argue against. So here's the obvious one, right? By the way, anyone who saw on Twitter, on this show, Maniac can go any way he wants to. It's just a conversation, isn't it? So he doesn't have to do that order, but it's up to you. Who is your number 2 on your list then?
I have Nico as number 2.
Okay.
I have Nico for, I would say, there's 2 or 3 main arguments. One is obviously the Katowice Cologne double trophy. and the other is his numbers throughout the year up until the last 2 months are stratospheric. Like if you're looking until, I would say, the rise of CS2, there's nobody but ZywOo that even has a conversation with NiKo's numbers. And this is one of the case where the eternal debate that I have within me is how much do I weigh the transition to CS2 and the struggles that he's having over the whole year? And I kind of have this internal debate, but I don't think that anyone has a case strong enough against NiKo this year, also considering what you just mentioned, like the amount of tournaments that they are, the S-tier tournaments that they are, the fact that he wins 2 out of the 3 most prestigious events out there, his numbers in these events as well. I don't think there is a stronger case than NiKo throughout the 12 months of 2023. If we had this conversation in a month, maybe that would have been enough for me to tip the scale and start opening the debate and opening the gates. But since his struggles have only been, let's say, 3 months out of 12, I do feel like the advance, the leeway he had in the first 9 months of the year might be enough for him to secure the second spot.
I mean, I do think, like, essentially, NiKo is one immediately where you're already going to see, as you set up there, that this is where recency bias will ruin this conversation. Yes. Because, like you say, the problem is the last period wasn't his strongest period. And obviously G2, quite frankly, even looked like they potentially turned events down because there was the roster moves going on. They didn't know if NiKo himself was going to Falcons. I get why they were a little bit, like, less active in CS2. But I think people are forgetting the first 2/3 of the year, mate. Like, the problem NiKo has is this. If you remember, when he won Katowice, famously, he actually kind of wasn't the best player there. It was other people with the best one. But Cologne, he was a banger at. And if you look at the rest of the year, I'd really say this is a rare example where you just got to go check the stats page for the events, guys. Like, the amount of events this guy has where essentially like I'm saying about, like, numbers was even before, like, he's putting up, like, MVP numbers in, like, half the fucking lands he's playing at, guys. Whether they come... And the joke is, this is why I've sort of agree I'd probably take NiKo as number 2 as well. Because here's the thing. It doesn't matter what his team's doing, mate. You can look at the LAN. He might come in 8th. He might come in 1st. He's doing the same numbers. Like, this guy he just does his job, and he's fucking superlative at it. And obviously, there are some tournaments where he has numbers that are bonkers. Like, I've always said this, right? This is where the rating part, to me, isn't as satisfactory. Like, I always say, for me, kills per round is the king stat in Counter-Strike, because my key thing I always say is it can't be faked. Like, I don't care what story people want to come to. Oh, it's just eco frag. There's no person who's not good who can eco frag and get 0.8 kills per round in a tournament. Like, that's not possible. I don't care how greedy you want to play. Like maybe it would be if we're playing tier 3 and it's an online cop and I can sort of pick my spots, Maniac. If I'm playing tier 1 lands against the best teams in the world, like, at the end of the day, it's like the blame F argument. That's why I don't know if he's the best rifler, but I'll never let anyone tell me he sucks. He cannot suck. Like, the eye test, the numbers tell me it's impossible. Like, to do that, you actually have to be good at some level of Counter-Strike. And NiKo is clearly exceptionally good. So for me, I do think he's a bit underrated in that sense, because people are just going to think of those. Like, I'll give you an example. Even though we all know the way the major ended with that fucking game against Fnatic was a nightmare and everyone was laughed at NiKo, have you seen his fucking numbers for that major, boys? He played more than well enough to be in the playoffs of that major. Yes, he had one map, for real, one map essentially, and we all know it had some shenanigans in the veto where he probably shouldn't be playing that map. He had one map basically that sucked. Aside from that, I look at those numbers for that major and I'm like, mate, G2 failed that one. I don't know that it was NiKo failed it. Yeah, he failed a map at the end, but, like, at the end of the day, and I mean, I remember there was a map earlier in that series where he was smurfing. Like, if they help him on that map, isn't that other map not necessary? You know, do we even have to be in that situation? Like the old simple scenario that used to happen back in the day, where I've always told people this. The best example ever is that ESL Cologne run when they played SK in the final. Like, yeah, he looked like shit in the final and Team Liquid looked like shit. Why were they in the final? There's the question you got to ask yourself. Like, they had no business even being there. Like, the joke is he actually played too well in the early games and made himself a harder game. Like, he sort of created the scenario where he looked bad because he was in the final. So I think people are sleeping on NiKo. The only argument for me, in my opinion, this is a mix of eye test, is if you want to do the ROPS angle. Obviously, both star riflers, both have been in teams that have won tournaments. The thing for me is this. I think ROPS is obviously more clutch. I don't think that's a big surprise to anyone. It's not like NiKo's bad with that. But the problem is, I do think ROPS is a little bit more, like, when I described earlier how it doesn't matter where G2 places, that's not the case for Ops, in my opinion. Like, in my opinion, if you're Ops, you actually can't just decide you're going to win every game. Like, if your team, I made this point in past episodes. If people like Brokey and Rain don't do aggressive moves, there is no Ops 1v3 clutch. Like, that suddenly becomes like a 1v5 clutch that he's just saving him because it's impossible. The difference is, if you know the way Nico plays the game, he could do this every single opponent, every single fucking map, seemingly. He actually is just a stud. So, as much as I know people are sort of a bit out on him, because I don't know why, they almost want it to be like Nico's washed or something. It's like, I don't get it, boys. Like, genuinely, this year, look, at times he looks as good as he's ever looked in CS. Like, he just looks fucking incredible. And like I said earlier, if you think about what he's taken on, he's definitely taken on more responsibility in his team, as in helping other players as well. Like, I think he's better than ever in some ways.
Well, I agree with you, but the real conversation then becomes, what about CS2? Because it has been complicated for him. Like, I think he's one of the players that has suffered the most, and in a longer sample size of events that's been struggling. And I personally hope he comes back like his very best in CS2. Like, we can actually.
If people don't know, 2 of his worst lands are CS2 lands.
Yeah, and I mean, the eye test doesn't lie. You look at him play, and he's even been vocal about it. It's like, I just can't feel it right now. I don't feel it. I don't feel my game. So I really hope that he's going to go back to this. But yeah, put the recency bias aside, and you realize there's nobody that truly has a case. And then you mentioned Robs, and this is where I personally feel like one of the most interesting inflection point of this entire ranking kind of starts. You come up with Robs as another name. Robs is my number 3. But holy hell, does that create a debate? And did that create a debate for people who are either...
What was pissing people off?
Yeah, Spinks and Monacy are names that people are throwing for that third position. I personally think that Robs has done enough to secure it. But I really think that here there is a debate to be had. And it depends on what do you see as a factor being important, and how do you weigh such factors in your decision making? Because if you actually just look in isolation, and you look at Spinks, and you look at Monacy, and you look at Robs, individually speaking, the former have better numbers. Like, they actually have better numbers. Spinks and Monacy have higher numbers, higher rating, possibly higher kill per round. But this is where the question becomes, what is the context of the performance? What has been achieved by the team? I also look at within the team, how is the contrast within the team? Like, if you're Spinks and you have high numbers, you have Zaiwu by your side. If you're Monacy, you have high numbers, you have Nico by your side. If you're Robs, you almost are the Nico. Sure, you have good players by your side, but there's no superstar that is going to put you in like favorable situations, favorable positions. So I think it's a very hard call to make, and I'm not going to stand here like I know the absolute religious truth and that's it. Nobody can ever have a different opinion. I do think that Robs deserves a third spot. Recency bias might come in effect because we've all been kind of blown away by his transition to CS2 and like the space he's taken in CS2. But actually, if you look at it, he's got very consistent high numbers throughout the year. It's just the race of phase just didn't have the same amount of success, and there's been failures all around. But I do feel like it's an open debate. I'd love to hear your opinion about it. I put him as a third, but that's because I value the team context within which the stats are being produced a whole lot.
Yeah, that was part of it. And it's also actually how Robs got his numbers for me. Because as you said, people remember, and CS2 obviously is one of the players that popped off like a motherfucker and has been like MVP candidate like every tournament pretty much. But I actually think what happened to Robs in CS2 is analogous to how Ziwu's been in CS2, where he has so much help now though. Like, it's not just him who has to win the tournament. If you look earlier in the year, actually, it used to be Robs that would even keep FaZe in a tournament. Like, they should have been bounced about in like quarters, sometimes maybe in the group stage. And he used to just win all those miracle clutches in CSGO before we came to CS2. So I actually think he had to do, in some ways, harder lifting in CSGO. And in CS2, the whole team's obviously been on fire. They've looked awesome in the events in general. I mean, the joke is, as we can even talk about a bit later, maybe, they even did bring Frozen in and just walk in the tournament, look good still. Like, look, he might not have transitioned yet, but the team had no issue with it. They just made that work immediately. So I actually do think that the point you're making is not an insignificant one, which is, it's one of the problems I have whenever people do like greatest of all time lists. If you notice, I don't really go too crazy about if you have like for example, if you had like in like 1.6, if you really thought Forrest was better than Neo, that's an acceptable opinion. My problem would be this: if we make a top 20 of all time list and suddenly you have like 2 of Forrest's teammates, just like you're talking about here, Maniac, I'm going to start to ask, well, how hard does it eventually get for that third guy to have what your greatest player of all time and then another top 15, top 10 player? So the same concept here. It's like, if you guys think Spinks is that much of a stud, Are we just going to ignore what we just said about Zero? Like, that Zero sometimes entries with an AK, and then Spinks is the lurker and cleans up those kills, plus gets kills on rounds that he kills 2 people and then saves. Like, you know what I mean? Like, look, Rops is doing that as well, but as you say, Rops has to do that and be the main primary output for his team. He has to have the production every game and do some of the things Spinks is doing. So I agree. And I think actually the m0NESY one, as much as this is going to sound biased, like when we were in CSGO at least, the AWP is an incredibly powerful gun. And I'm sorry, the way he plays, he's not being forced to do like old school Kenny S, like entry all the time with the AWP. Like he has a little bit more resources for me as an AWPer. So in his team, he has Nico, for fuck's sake. And again, by the way, just like Z2, Nico's sometimes entering or the guy taking all the... By the way, this guy fucking loves to take duels. Like, Spinks likes to take duels, but his position on the map just means he's not taking them 24/7 in the same way. So, like, I'm not going to hate on any of these players. These are all great names to put in the mix, and you can have them different names, but I'm with you. For me, the eye test, and even actually, when I look at the stats even, like, I'd argue this, yes, FaZe was awesome in CS2, but hasn't Vitality been, like top 3, like, the majority of the year? Like, if anything, I think Spinks could have pumped his numbers up even more if he really was, like, the 2nd or 3rd best player in the world. Like, if he'd really gone supernova, maybe I would say he could be that. Like, it's not impossible, like we're saying, just because he had Zemu. My problem is, I just think he had a very good year, but again, this is why I don't think the numbers would work out. Like, I think if there was some way there isn't, to put it side by side, I think you'd see differences. I think you'd see times where it's a little bit easier. Like I'm saying, I'm just thinking of Spinks cleaning up a rotation where Zemu already entered the site. Like, that Rops isn't doing that, you know.
I know, and this is where it's really hard to have an objective take on people's numbers and where they come from, because there's 2 ways you can look at it, right? You can say, oh, but how can Spix have so many kills when he's playing with ZywOo? Like, ZywOo's obviously racking up a bunch of kills, so obviously he has less kills, which I guess is one way to look at it, and I cannot fault you for thinking like that. But then you have to consider how many rounds ZywOo win that then puts you in an economical advantage, which means you have an easier round, which means you have a higher rating, which means you have a better victory. And there's like this sort of like correlation between like having a very strong players in your team, getting easier rounds, and then obviously having a good output in these rounds. And I think Rops does not benefit from that to that crazy extent. Sure, he's got good players with him now in CS2, undeniable, undebatable. But I do think that Rops kind of had to manufacture these good situations on his own, more than Spigs had to, and more than m0NESY had to throughout the year. And this is where, even though the numbers might favor the 2 others, I would slightly favor Rops. But as you say, there's a conversation to be had. And if someone comes to me and says, no, I actually think it's Spigs, I'm not going to say you're an idiot. Say, okay, let's hear the arguments out. Like, there's definitely a debate.
Because that was who I had as my number 4, was Spinks. By the way, I actually do get the feeling if I go down, like m0NESY was right up there as well. It's another name I was thinking of. The problem is, as a general note, I will say, this is where it's not... Look, I'll never punish someone because their team wasn't good. But at the same time, you just didn't get put in a position to play those matches sometimes. It's the reason why, even though I used to call in 2016, I was the one person who thought Nico was better than Coldzera. But that was just eye tests. Like, he didn't even play major finals, so he couldn't actually get the chance to do what then Coldzera did do. So I always had to... Like, at the end of the year, if you ever go back in my article, I did give it up. I think I probably put Nico like 3 or something like that in the list. But the reason I bring this up is the 2 players I am going to have to penalise on this list. That's why they can't get in my top 5, I'm afraid. Just because of the team, is got to be the Astralis boys. Like, I actually think both Device and BlameF, in the context of what they were working with and where they were put, they're fucking fragged out. Like, BlameF, by the way, has been arguably the best he's ever been, and Device looked awesome as a bounce back. But like I say, if we actually think about it, beyond like the odd run, they weren't like, no one was expecting this team to win fucking Cologne. They were relevant at the major. You know what I mean? Like, the real problem they had was it tended to be smaller events and it was one-off runs, and it was fragging out in losing performances, which, look, I give you points for, like, spoiler, even though you never did anything like team-wise, I'd put you maybe top 10. You could be at the bottom of my top 10, but... I'm sorry, even if I'm the biggest Device fan ever, I can't put Device in at the top now. Like,
I have them 9.
You know what I mean? Like,
I have them 9.
The joke is, like I said earlier, if people think we're like dissing m0NESY by not letting him be 3rd, no, dissing m0NESY would be saying that Device gets to be above him just because m0NESY was like, the Device had better numbers or whatever. Like, no, in that scenario, like, I will give it up to m0NESY. m0NESY was in the fucking prestige semis and big matches and having to go and getting judged when he failed at a major and stuff. For people like the Astralis boys, essentially, until now when they get a real lineup, they sort of get a pass for not doing well at the tournament, but they don't just get to automatically get top 5 of the year or whatever. Not least because I think it's set a bad precedent that you really can't just farm on a bad team. Not that they were trying to do that, but just effectively is what they ended up doing, isn't it? Because those are the people I had the hardest time rating, was those two players, mate.
I have them as 9 and 10.
Right, there you go then.
Because I felt like, gun to my head, if someone was asking me, is Device currently a top 10 player in the world? I would say yes.
Yeah.
I'd say yes, he is. You're looking at him play, but then you have to admit and you have to acknowledge that there were few moments where he actually was playing in the semis, in the corners of the S tier tournament, and he had platform to kind of showcase the level he's got. But whenever he was playing, he was destroying everybody all the time. So how much of that can you actually fault him or the rest of the lineup, the revolving door that Astralis had for a while? So I have Blame F and Device 9 and 10. I don't think the debate of who is in 9th or who is in 10th is kind of that interesting. I think it's kind of a boring debate in itself. But one player that, because you said something interesting about, you need to see players in semis and grand finals to give them like an apt judgment. One player that I think kind of suffers from that is Frozen. Because I have Frozen. I have Frozen on 6th place. And not because I profoundly think that Spinks and Robs are like miles ahead of him. No, I think Frozen is an excellent player, but he does not have the same pedigree at the end of the year where I can actually sit down and compare him to the Spinxes and the Monacies and like semis and grand finals. Although with Monacy, I guess the door could kind of be open about, the deep runs that were had or not. But I do think that Frozen, this is this famous last step that we were talking about for Frozen. Like you're at the gate. You're at the gate of the Parthenon. You're right there. Like you're top 6. That's how I see you. Now you're in phase, and if you continue on your trajectory next year, maybe you'll make it to the top 5 because you have all these deep runs and you have grand finals that we can reference to, and we have moments and highlights in hard pressure situations. We're like, oh shit! Like remember how Frozen won this clutch for them? It's incredible. There are a few good signs already at the World Finals. There were a few moments where you can already see that he wasn't lost, but it was a moderate performance from him.
Yes.
Doesn't really matter to me. Doesn't really matter. We're going to give him time. That would be completely baseless not to do that. But I have him on 6th because of that last step that I believe is going to be either or not established in 2024.
Oh, I know what you mean. Like, the funny thing is, like I say, to me, it was FaZe that just looked comfortable with him walking in. He himself clearly still needs to transition. Like, he wasn't like some superstar player. The joke is, if he'd actually played better, they probably could have won this tournament. Whereas the difference is, if you look at the Vitality team in CS2, they always do have a second player pop off. Look, it was Flames when he first came in, then even Mezzi had this big run now. Spinks is always lurking on there. The difference in FaZe was, we just it's like, well, that's how we set up the narrative perfectly, because we get to see it. Frozen has to now shows that he isn't just Frozen for Mousy. He needs to be like essentially, like I said earlier, mate, with the team he's on now, if you're going to be one of the best players in the world, this is when it happens. You've had your runway, you've got the team in front, you've got the people, like now's when you look, like you say though, we don't expect it the first tournament. We'll give you a pass for that one, and that was short term. You only got done the deal like the week before or something. So no, the problem I have is this. I do agree on that one. That is a tricky one, because essentially I do think if you went and looked without having checked the stats myself, I'd imagine he did get to have a lot of games against like lesser teams where he was able to farm stats. He just wasn't in the hardest games all the time. I'll tell you the player that actually does torture me on this list, though, Maniac. Look, we'd have to keep going because I said we won't do like a full top 20.
We're going now.
But the player that really kills me, because this is even worse than the Astralis one, is fucking Shiro.
I know.
Do you know why you get this? Because first of all, he barely has played in the last few months. Then secondly, we all know, like, basically the end of Cloud9, he was playing shit and then he just bailed, like he just went from the team. And so the problem is he has simultaneously got the Astralis thing of he wasn't in many finals and big semis, and then he's had this period that's inactive. But then I'll tell you what, if you are someone who looks at the stats, you'll never be able to doubt Shiro's stats. Like Shiro's he is the guy who can play 2 maps and lose the tournament in last place, but have like a 1.25 rating because he is that AWPer. Like, look, we all know he's got that defensive style, but I tell you what, it's like Blame F. He's fucking good at it though. Again, if anyone wants to tell me it's a bait, he's comments get no, that's just a defensive style of AWPing, mate, and that's it's its own masterclass in the same way as there are players in history in chess who aren't like super aggressive. But I tell you what, you have a fucking hard time beating them or getting a draw out of them. They'll just grind you down. Like he has that skill set. So the problem I have with this player is, when we start applying all the contextual filters, I feel like a lot of them are playing against him. So like I say, I'm kind of tortured on this, mate. Like, because I feel like from what I saw from him, he probably is a top 10 player in the world, but like, can I actually put him like in a year where I think of some of the other names as well, Maniac? Like, think of people, by the way, who actually are the rare people in other roles who normally don't get these spots. Like, I'll tell you what, if you look at all these mouse performances, Didn't that exertion guy kind of have some fucking mega impact in tournament? Like, there's a lot of names this year. This isn't one of those ones where I can just give you a free top 10 spot. Like, I feel like Shiro might be the guy where I have to sort of bump him down, even though my vibe does tell me, like, if you are, essentially, I'll do a similar thing to you. If you put a gun to my head and say, you have to draft players today and we go one by one, this guy's not getting out my top 10. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, maybe I'm taking Modesty before. He's going to be picked before then if we're making squads. Like, this guy's fucking beast. But again, I feel like, did he play enough matches? Was his team in the game? You know what I mean? Like, it's a tough one. Where are you at on that? What do you do with Shiro?
I had the same kind of conundrum you were explaining because I had to go first through my recency bias, which were telling me like, oh, Shiro bailed out of Cloud9. He didn't really have a good Sydney, which obviously Sydney by the numbers was his worst event by far. And turns out if you look at the stats, I have them right there. This is the only event where he's got a negative KD. It's the only event where he's got below 1 rating. The rest of the numbers are bonkers.
It's mental, isn't it?
It is mental, but this is where I actually have to agree, and I would extend you the courtesy, is that where is the impact in turning these stats into winning moments? Because that's definitely an avenue if you want to criticize Shiro. The way I see it, he's the most reliable AWP in defensive positions that there is in the game.
Oh, for sure.
I would almost, I mean, maybe not Zaiwu today, but I would almost have to have an internal conversation whether or not I want Shiro to hold an angle or I want someone else in terms of like defensive and who is going to get punished. So he's been doing that day in, day out, the whole year, nonstop. The fact that he's missed his last few months, we haven't really seen him in CS2. In fact, we've only seen 6 maps of him in CS2. I have no idea how he looks like in official. We're going to have to see in Spirit now. But I have the same kind of problem I have with Simple. Shiro and Simple gave me the same vibe. Like, where do I have to place them this year? Because obviously the results aren't exactly here. There's a moment of absence towards the very end, so I don't really know where they stand right now. But I have Shiro in my top 10. I wouldn't be mad if someone told me he does not belong there or he does not deserve to be there. My biggest pet peeve is that this whole I'm getting out of Cloud9 now kind of butters me. Like, he's in Spirit, and that's fine. I obviously get a little bit of a pinch of excitement for this like Donk Shiro combination, what's going to happen in 24. I would have just loved to see him stay in Cloud9 now that they have Boomich. Holy hell, like give me the
that would be the dream lineup, right?
I know. It's like give me the AWP back now, and then we get to really test him. This was a failure towards the very end. I still have him in my top 10 because I think outside from Sydney, whenever he stepped into the server, he was one of the 10 best players in the world. Every single goddamn game, no matter win or loss, he was always there. But I am open to being criticized and proven wrong. And if he ends up not being in the top 10, I'm not going to make a fuss about it. I'll take the L, but I have him in my top 10.
You just mentioned the player that, like, look, that's just on stats areas. I'll tell you the player that with the eye test tortures me. You mentioned him, it's Simple. Because here's what's funny. This is where you have to know why I call Simple, Nico, Ziwu. Maybe in the future, people like Shiro can get in. This is just aliens, Monacy. The reason why I think these people, it's almost like they're not human, is because, like the famous saying goes, it's human to err, to fail, to slip up. These guys almost never do. Like, what's hilarious is, here's the problem, Maniac. Because we all know, like, Simple just has, I'm just going to say, I think he has the best eye test in esports history, mate. I've seen everyone in Quake, fucking StarCraft, League of Legends, Dota. Like, nobody ever just constantly blew my mind, like the fucking Fallen machine quote, like, actually just blowing my mind when I'm watching them play like Simple has. In fact, I always tell people, the reason he became easily my favourite player to watch, even though he might not be my favourite player, is just even the fact that he never fucking turns down a clutch. Like, he goes for every 1v3 with an AWP. Like, unless essentially they have him completely locked out, he's always going to go for the first kill, see if he can make that, turn it to 1v2, then get a 1v... Everyone knows that's why everyone loves his game, right? So here's the problem. Because I'm used to the craziest ever eye test, it actually feels like, before I look at the numbers, Maniac, oh, Simple, yeah, it's like that fan said, is he even a top 20 player? Like, surely, you know, maybe he's like 17th or something, you know, and he hasn't even played for months. But then I go back and it's like, that's because I'm comparing him to him.
I know.
Like, from past years. Like, if I actually compare him to other players, think about the players we even just talked about, like Shiro, he's in the category at least. Like, look, I'll give them players probably both the edge over him, but it's not like they're not light years away from him. It's not like he's some bum. And quite frankly, you even add in, like, When they first made that lineup, like there's a reason they made that Pro League run. Like he was back in good form again. He was one of the better players. People forget that was when Bit was still getting his shit together. Like he was arguably the best player in the team still. So I actually think in some ways he's probably a bit slept on, and people are going to forget, dude. Look, Navi had a terrible year for winning trophies and finals, but they were in a lot of semi-finals actually. Like more than you remember. Like essentially, it shows how even Navi the squad, because we expect them to be 1, 2, or 3 in the world, we're ignoring the fact that they were still in the mix a bunch of times. I mean, remember they themselves were almost in the major playoffs. Like I actually do think his year is going to be really hard for people to figure out, because I think the numbers don't tell the story. The eye test, like I said, bizarrely doesn't, because if anything, you watch the game and you're like, why isn't he just killing everyone? And then you have to remember, wait, that's not even normal for the other great players. Like, what am I talking? Essentially, aside from Zero, who am I comparing him to? Like,
yeah, I think it's nearly impossible to look at Simple right now and try to be objective about how he plays, because you will always contrast himself to himself. And then obviously this year was a disappointment. Like we're not going to sugarcoat it. This wasn't a simple type
definitely
year.
Way worse than every other year for like past 5 years. That goes without saying.
Yeah, past 5 years. Yeah, I was going to say he probably had like 1 year where he was like 11th or something. It was a bit of a complicated year if I remember correctly. But then aside from that, we have a tendency, and myself included, we have a tendency to be way more negative with himself than he actually was. You mentioned it. Semi-final in Katowice, semi-final Pro League 17, semi-final IEM Rio, top 8 in Cologne, grand final in Pro League 18. These aren't like bad results. No. By simple standard, these aren't good results. But if we're actually comparing him with the rest of the mortals out there, this is still a modestly good year. And within this tournament, like the numbers are still simple-esque. Like,
and it's still him having a carry. This is the other thing, mate. We're not in the 2021 lineup. There's no Bit got good in CS2. Like the rest of the year, there's a reason they broke the squad up. You know.
Yeah, I think the first 6 months of the year probably save him a little bit, because if you were just considering the last 6, he definitely was already on a downwards trajectory with the whole international roster, and then obviously when CS2 came out, he disappeared. But because we have to respect the first 6 months and the tournaments he's played in, I personally have him like 8th. I have him at top 10.
Yes,
and I'll fight anyone who tells me he's not a top 10 player this year. I'll make a case. But this is where we really have to check our own sort of bias on how we think about a player. Why are we being so negative? Why do we think he was so disappointing? And are we comparing him to his own standards, or are we comparing him to the actual other 20 players who would be on that list? And so for that reason, I still believe he belongs in the top 10. But again, there is an expiration date on this evaluation. As we say, as time progresses, as we are entering right now, if you and I, we were to make a power ranking of the top 20 at the beginning of 2024, hell yeah, he's not on that list. Like he's not anywhere near that list. He's gone. He's not even in the second ballot. But because we're considering 2023 and not just the last 3 months of it, I think he's got a resume strong enough to be in the top 10.
Yeah, 2 things to say on that. One is like, I do think that what people are mistaking is like the real story for Simple isn't like Simple's done. It's more like Simple wasn't top 5 Raw. Like that's alien for him. That is crazy in itself. You don't even have to go further than that. That just shows like something went wrong this year. But the other thing I'll mention, because I saw people mention about Ziwu, is this is why until people do something, you don't ever give them the credit for doing it. Because actually, it's true. When Ziwu gets number 1 this year, he has now done what only Simple had done, where you do like the 5-year stretch where you're always number 1 and number 2. That is insane, by the way. But that's also why I always caution people, until they do it, you can't say it, because I already see they're doing this, Maniac, where, look, to be fair, this is actually less a diss against the fan and more credit to the player. These players are like aliens, and they're so exceptionally good. They make you think stupid things like even though I just discussed, there's even past years where the reason Zero was number 2 is he'd have a down person of the year. People, when you're on top, they can't see that. They think you're just going to keep doing this like a graph that goes like that. Mm-hmm. So the real problem is people say things that, look, are just absurd statements. Like they go, if Zero can keep this up for 2 or 3 more years, he'll be the greatest of all time. It's like when you put like keep this up, like you do realize like no one in history ever did that. Like it's only him and Simple have done this sort of a run. Or if you go to 1.6, like Neo and Forest and people like that, right? And even then I debate, some people maybe are a bit nostalgically remembering some of those years, right? There's no if you do it for 2 or 3 more years. Each of these years are monumental things in history, guys. Like, by the way, if either of them does it 1 more year ever, I'll go, holy fuck. Like, I'm not sitting back going, I'll tell you what, if you do it 2 or 3 more years, like, You know, this is where I feel like people forget what happened before we had Simple and Zero Maniac. You remember what it was like? A great player was like Olafmeister in a year, he was the best, then maybe he was the 5th best next year. Shocks would be like the 2nd best player in the world, but then maybe he's like the 8th best next year. That's reality. That's even the great players are up and down. The idea these two guys came along, and by the way, outside of this is where you can never win if you fucking device. While these two aliens just battle over number 1, you're just chilling as like a consistent like top 5 the whole time. And we're not even talking about you, mate. You're just off. You're not even in this convo. So like, it just shows you like, guys, this is why I always say that line on Twitter. I say it about Nico, Zero and Simple especially. Like, please cherish what we're watching right now, because you will be the boomer in 20 years. When there aren't players doing this every year, there'll maybe be like one who comes along, like a Monacy comes along every few years. You will be the one going, hey, during my year, like you'll be like the players now who are like, I watched Messi and Ronaldo or whatever. Like, that doesn't just come along every year, guys. You don't just get those sick players that can just peel off. Half a decade in a row to be like consensus number 1 or 2 is fucking insane. Like, you can't fuck with that. That's impossibly good. Yeah.
It's the Messi, Ronaldo of football. It's the Djokovic, Federer, Nadal of tennis. We just look back and like, oh yeah, but who was playing besides these three? Like, who was playing besides these two? Just a footnote in history when they were like extraordinary players like Andy Murray or whatever. Nobody even thinks about.
I mean,
like,
you see it now, right? In tennis right now, it's basically just Djokovic at the moment because Nadal has to like take half the year out with injuries. Like, it does feel different when those players go and suddenly you like, it's like you just have normal pros, and guess what? Normal pros just like he wins one tournament, he comes 9th in the next one. That is just normal reality for people, isn't it?
I know, and I think people in Counter-Strike are starting to do. They're going on the other side of the extreme where they're so anticipating the next one that's going to come that people are telling me like Donk is about to destroy Sideways. I'm like, what is happening? True. Please don't do this. Please don't do this to this guy. Like, just give him the space, give him time to become whatever he's going to become. And if he ends up being one of the greatest of all time, good for him. I'm happy. But like, you are actually destroying
Maniac.
someone.
Have you heard this rumor? I don't know if this got to you in the green room, but put it this way. You know, I've always criticized Monacy's buyout being $600,000. It might even have been like $625,000 or whatever. It was like some crazy amount. And the reason I always criticized it is he hadn't actually yet become Monacy yet when he did that deal. Like, that deal would make loads of sense now. Like, I'd pay $1 million for him now. But at the time, what if that had been a bust? You know, what if that had just been like one of these very good players that doesn't make it, right? Dude, all I'll tell you is this. I've heard that Donk's buyout, fuck the Shiro buyout, Donk's buyout is millions of dollars. Millions! I've heard people inquired and they were just told, I can't tell if it's supposed to be. We really are going to get the millions, or it's like he's not for sale. That's why it's millions. But like, it's millions, dude. And even though, as you say, like, bro, you got the joke is in the analogy of the greatest players ever. He is like, you know that thing people say about you when you haven't been born. They go, you weren't even a twinkle in your dad's. He's not even a twinkle in a HLTV reviewer's eyes. Like, he hasn't yet played any of the tournaments, guys. Like, he's not actually in tier 1 yet. Like, why are we joking? Like, this is like a stock we're all buying low. Like, it's not even a stock yet by that analogy. You know, it hasn't gone public yet, if you know what I mean. Like, look, I get it that like if you do say about all those players, you are eventually going to be right, and one of them will be a Monacy or something. But like, I agree, they're getting ahead of themselves on that one, because I actually feel like it is unfair to the player. Like, we're going to expect this guy to walk into like a pro league or something, and he's going to be expected to just be fucking like simple immediately. Like it's not even going to have the fucking wind up time. And by the way, that's why I always said I actually did think Monacy's fucking rookie year was impossibly good. Look, some people critiqued it, but it's like, what do you expect? He's a 16-year-old kid playing lands, and we're just making like just be 23-year-old simple. Like, I can't do that, mate. I'm neither of those things.
No, exactly. If your expectation is for a player to start number 1 in the world, like, he can only disappoint you. Like, he can literally only disappoint you.
Also, like you said, they want him to go up against Ziwu, and they're going to judge him in his first game. Like, oh, he's head-to-head with Ziwu. Like, bro, like, I think Ziwu's had a pretty good sort of warm-up period in his career to get ready for this match, hasn't he? Like, the other guy's just a young, like, Russian fucking player trying to just get his start in the game.
I know. It's, you know, people are being unreasonable.
I love it.
But I am quite intrigued about what's going to happen in 24, and I hope we get to see him. Like, I mean, this Dacha tournament, obviously he showcased that he can definitely he can keep it up against the very best. There's no doubt. But I think I'd love to see him like regularly in high terms. I hope Spirit's going to get the chance here and there. But yeah. Let's just take a deep breath. Like, let's relax, everybody. Like, why is the debate now whether or not Donk is going to be number 1 in 24? Like,
I'll tell you what my question would be. Look, it's not a question with an answer. It's a rhetorical question. But if anyone out there can think of an angle, do let me know. What is going on in fucking the CIS region with all these AWPers, mate? Like, remember in these other regions, if we get like 1 or 2 players from a country, they'll just be built around their whole, like for the next 10 years. Like, Dude, they just have like unlimited AWPers in this region. It's crazy. Like, I don't get it. Like, as much as I've been mourning like Dexter not getting picked up, well, there's a reason why, because there's just so much supply. It's like you can just sort of get a Dexter with a downside, apparently. So, like, there's too many players in that region. It's crazy, mate. I don't get it.
Yeah. Now he's getting it. Now he's getting it with the rifle down, right? Because
Yes.
Art first was a sniper from Spirit. Obviously, he gets pushed out because Shiro's coming in.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of people that you feel bad about losing your spot to, but I guess Shiro sort of kind of makes sense. But then again, yeah, the Shiro Donk duo for 2024. That's something that we're gonna keep an eye on. I think this could be something spicy. Hopefully, it doesn't turn out to be another disappointment. I mean, Shiro does have experience with and a good rifle by his side, and not exactly turning into trophies. So I do hope that it's gonna look great for 2024.
Sure. No, but that's the craziest thing, mate. It's like Europe produces rifles. And we have players like Donk. Like, you've seen them. It's people like Frozen, and they'll come through the ranks. But like, it's the snipers, mate. Because that's the craziest part to me. It's like, I don't think people realize, as much as like in isolation, it's a bummer when you hear like Shiro join Spirit, because you're like, oh fuck, I wanted him in any of the other big dogs. Those two players, I agree. Like, that's going to be the sleeper duo, right? They could just get work done themselves. Like, that could be you could qualify to a major. You can do all sorts of things with players like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And considering, I mean, 2024 might be maybe 1 year too early, but considering what might happen in 2025 with like the non-partner leagues happening and having more like different invitational tournaments here and there, left, right, and center, this is where arguably you can make the case that teams that were not usually partners in said leagues would have a bit more time in like high or S tier tournaments, and this would be a moment for such profiles to kind of show up and show what they can do. So we'll have to see. But yeah, Shiro Donk is an interesting deal. That's for sure. A whole lot of people are buying that stocks right now.
Just at least, could we please have like at least 2 tier 1 lands before we start judging him, please?
That'd be great. That'd be reasonable, right?
And also, especially because they're not the top teams as well. It's one thing if they join Na'Vi and then played works them for 3 months. They're like this. They're in who knows in these teams? But I don't know what Spirit's coaching structure's like, or what the fucking work, or the shot calling works. Like, who the fuck knows? It's a mystery to me, man. It's a complete black box. I have no idea any of the inputs. Like, I know when someone plays with Snappy, what Snappy's history is, or if he plays with a veteran player, whether he should be doing something or not. It's hard to judge all the external factors to me. Right, I've got a question for you, which is this. One of the hardest ones this year, I actually think the hardest category of all of them to figure out, Maniac, is actually in-game leader of the year.
Okay.
Because the problem you have is this. The team, look, lineups obviously changed, like Vitality's changed lineup a bunch of times. The team that won the most overall, if you count all lineups, is Vitality. But like, I mean, we've talked about this on past episodes. Who the fuck's ever said Apex is the best IGL? Anyone? But the problem is
before that moment. Or...
Yeah, no one ever said it, right?
Yeah,
In fact, I don't think for other people he was until the end when they start winning all these tournaments in CS2. I don't think most people even allowed him in those conversations. Those conversations were these names. It was obviously Carrigan because of FaZe and winning the Grand Slams. Snappy because there's no way should have those results. I actually think the guy's been forgotten now is bloody Cadian because of not so much has gone on in CS2. But Cadian for the first half of the year, 2/3 was cooking. And then you've got Apex, you can round out the Hooksy, like these are the other people winning tournaments, so you have to put them in the mix. My problem is, essentially, here's the question I have for you, Maniac. It's a really tough one. It's not one that necessarily has an answer, but I want to see your answer. So here's my problem. I am actually sort of biased against Apex. Like, it's a bit like Hooksy. I don't even really know at this point what my answer would be if you said, what could they do to prove they're the best IGL? Like, essentially... it would probably have to be somewhat extreme. Like, I'd have to see Apex do like Carrigan-esque sick mid-round calls that look like they can only come from the IGL and his read, and he didn't, his star didn't take a duel that he won that opened the side. If I saw that, maybe I'd believe. So essentially, I actually have a hard time with this because if he keeps winning enough tournaments and they keep changing all the other players, I probably should give him more credit as an IGL. Like, he must be doing his job better than I acknowledge. So in the same way as I always say, like, I'll never hate on Hooksy in the sense if he can win tournaments, he must have done something. He can't be bad. But will I ever think Hooksy's actually like top 3 in the world? I don't know that I will. So where do you come with that on this Apex one? Because I feel like, even though he's never really tried to claim he is a mastermind, he's won a lot of tournaments, mate. He has won a lot of tournaments.
I agree with you. And when you were talking about, if he kept on winning with changing lineups, I personally feel like we are already beyond that point. I think that the conversation around Apex changed from the victory at the major, obviously with Dupree and Magisk, and then at the time, you could probably make the argument like you have an extremely strong lineup around you. You have up-and-coming Spinks, you have Zaiwu, of course, and you have the experience from the Danish duo, and you could probably downplay the role of the IGL in that situation. I wouldn't really hold it against you. But then you make this risky change of bringing in Flamesy for Dupree. You have a young player who's very inexperienced at the top level, coming in from OG, doesn't even know what a stage really looks like at the very top. And then you win a very hard tournament, single elimination, best of 3 bracket. You actually survive that to win in Gamers 8 with Flamesy. Ori at this time, it's like, oh, it's an eyebrow raiser. It's like, oh, hold on a second. Like, Vitality actually won with Flamesy immediately. Wow, that in itself, that says something about the structure of the team and the ability to bring in a player. And then you go on and you do it again, but this time with Mezzi, and you win back-to-back tournaments with Mezzi coming in. When you lose Magisk, for my money, anchor of the year, by the way, I don't think there's a debate. Magisk is the anchor of the year for 2023. I don't think anybody's got a stronger case than him. You lose this guy, you bring in Mezzi, who, akin to Flamesy, has literally 0 experience of S tier, was playing in Fnatic, before that was playing in Cloud9. And you're telling me that with this lineup, you're going to win the 2 last high-level tournaments of this year, Blast Finals, Blast World Finals. I think you've already reached a point where you have established that whatever Counter-Strike you're playing is the highest level Counter-Strike. And I think the eye test of Vitality playing CS at the end of the year is the best CS that we have. It's the best CS. You can never take away what ZywOo is doing in that team. You can never take away what Spinx can do in that team. And they're always going to be sort of mediator factors to how you judge Apex. But I think the quality of the Counter-Strike that they play currently, the ability to bring in new players and not having to not needing 3 months to win, but literally immediately winning the first tournament after you bring in your new player, I don't believe anyone has a case against Apex this year. I don't think he has an actual real opponent that could claim that that leader has done better within the year that Apex has done. I think he's jumped through enough hoops of fire. And he's my leader of the year for 23.
Ooh, okay, that's edgy. Okay, like I can see how you set it up. I'll also throw in as well, by the way. I even think if you want to add in like things he did this year, remember at the first Pro League of the year, he had to use Jax instead of like Spinx or something ridiculous initially. Like,
that's right.
And look, they did like they got them to the playoffs. Like they lost with a different lineup when they brought back the real lineup. But like, that's like a player that, like, the joke is people aren't excited to hear Jax joins any team. He came into the best team in the world as a stand-in, and by the way, Apex made him look awesome. He looked fucking great there. Like, it looked like, wow, it's like it's why, by the way, even though it was never true, that Harumi idiot tried to tease that Jax was coming back now to Vitality. Because, like, look, if you were trying to just make a crazy guess, it's not that terrible one, right? He did play great earlier in the year. He stood in, seemed like he fit like clockwork. They know Apex is a fan. Their problem is they don't seem to realise there is no impetus to pick up French players anymore. That thing has gone, and it was just a totally fake story. Like, I even looked into that one. It was just nonsense. It was just like it was like just a cool HLTV forum idea that got out of control or something. So that one's a killer for me. But here's the thing. I can't make him number 1 of the year, but I just got to say, I'm already sort of making myself have the conversation, though, that, like, if he keeps doing this, I have to keep bumping him up the rankings. Like, eventually, I have to be wrong if he's winning too many of these tournaments, because I look at all the different players he's done it with. That's the thing. Even though now you can argue he's got more talent, as you say, the experience is non-existent. Like, in my opinion, when you have players like that, you might not always see it in the games. That's actually why the joke is now it'll probably end up like Flames, and then in a few months, I predict Mezzi will probably end up overrated, because you just won't see some of the flaws they have in the game, because they have mega veteran superstar players around them, and that can just make it so that, like, you make the mistake but it doesn't cost you the round or doesn't lose you the game, you know. I think there's probably a bit of that if anything, like, that's also the other thing. It's part of the reason, by the way, why I said for me Snappy's easily in the conversation, because look at the players he's working with. Like, here's the joke about works as an IGL maniac. If I say to someone like, Snappy was fucking amazing, they're going to go, but he had St. Pius and Nertz and Diha. It's like, right, first of all, no one ever said Diha was some monster. We all said he's a good player, like one of the better players in the team. Nertz was nobody before this year began. He was fucking an endpoint. Like, people act like he's been in the team 2 years, man. I feel like in some people's minds, Spinx and Nertz are the same player. And they just have this lineup for 2 years. Like, the joke is, if he's a top 20 player, though, he should fucking thank Snappy, because Snappy helped that happen. And then the Sun Pius one, bro, now I know recency bias has gone crazy. Earlier this year, no one had this guy as like a top AWPer in the world. Now he's like a contender for best AWPer in the world. He's like a top 3 player probably. So I actually think if you look at it, like, that's why for me, Snappy goes right right in there. But I actually think people probably don't give Apex his due. So I won't make him number one. Like, if I had to do number one, I'll probably still go with that traditional bias and probably pick Carrigan this year. I actually think between the others, like, the problem Snappy has is obviously not that much at the end of the year. Cadian just fell off like a motherfucker and had all the drama with Heroic. I think Carrigan was even actually good earlier in the year, even if the team was a bit sus. People know he did all the miracle calls at the end of the game. Obviously, that godlike end one was right in the middle of the... I think in general, just look, he's had a good year. The tough one is, like I say, it's more for next year. Like, I'm going to have to seriously think about this Apex one, because I can't just deny him forever. Like, there has to be something he can do that makes... Look, beyond just, like, definitely see it was a cool round he did. There's got to be something tips the
problem
scales
that we have,
eventually, right?
The problem we have is that I feel like we are more... With Kerrigan, I feel like there's been enough pieces of content out there, and we've talked to him enough that we sort of feel like we can almost touch his calls while the game is happening, right? We feel connected to how he's playing, and then we give him a whole lot of credit for like crazy rounds being called out, and like ESL had some of these like nice round breakdown with TeamSpeak, and that gives a platform and it shines a light on how a leader is kind of progressing and how he's behaving throughout the game. And we're clear on Kerrigan's. Nobody's ever going to say, oh, I don't really know if Kerrigan has good mid-round calls. Like, we know it's his visit card. I believe that Apex has that same ability, or close to that, probably not the same level, but close to that. But I don't think we are aware of it. So I think
tell you what you want to see then.
A whole lot of credit.
The dream here would be, by the way, this is plausible. You could do this. I'd even suggest if he watches this, do this for real, right? So I'll give you an example. In Dota 2, Maniac, back in the day, when an American player called PPD, who was one of my mates, was like the in-game leader of Evil Geniuses, right? He was like the hard support position 5, where you get no resources, and essentially you're just like a coach in the game almost. Like, your job is just shot call, help everyone else set the game up. And he was the best caller, right? And one of the things about this guy was, let me think how I'm going to explain this. Oh, this is it. What he used to do is, people knew anyway he was very good as a captain, but he used to also then just release videos where once enough time had passed, he'd just do a video breakdown of like a draft he did in Dota of like, this is the champion I banned, this is one a hero that I picked, and he would just explain his whole reasoning, like, right, I did this because I understood if I pick this, they'll have to pick a different one on 3, and then that's going to set up my And what it did was, because you understood his reasoning, it made any of the good decisions he made cleverer, because you understood why it was clever and if Apex did that, like, I would suggest do it already on the lineup that won the major. Like, it's changed enough now. We're in CS2. Get like some of the major VODs that you win and games where you win in T-side rounds, and just do a VOD review for us in English. Like, just shows like, this is what I was thinking here, pause it. By the way, the dream, obviously, he doesn't have Zonic anymore. Would if he could have had his coach in there as well, you could have had the discussion. This is when we took the time out and I said, what if we try this? If we had some of that info, I feel like it'd help make the case a bit easier. Because the other problem I have is a natural bias, Maniac, which is part of me still sees Apex as the fucking... not brain dead, but just
23 or 13.
His job was run through a brick wall. So it's just hard for me to believe that player. I'm typecasting him. It's hard for me to believe that player then sat down and was like... Napoleon-esque, like, move these troops this way. Like, you know, I'm still taking a while to convince myself that's real.
Yo, you mentioned coach as well. That's an underrated topic on Apex as well. Like, he's won with Zonic.
Yeah.
He's won with no coach. He's won with Matt behind him as an analyst, acting coach, and now he's won again with XS coming back up. I feel like that should be somewhere in the resume if you're considering
people do forget that one. You notice that they forget that he won the event because Zonic didn't attend the event. There was no Zonic at the game as 8 or whatever, right? Yeah, he just wasn't there at all. Yeah,
exactly. And another aspect as well, and I'm going to put Apex on prime highlight for that, but I do think Kerrigan did that earlier in his year, is I think this year Apex has done better than Kerrigan at mentoring new players into something greater than they were at the start. Because if you think of Kerrigan and the pieces he's had in phase, sure, he's made the most out of it. Like, incredible good calls and all that. But most of these players were sort of already close to the peak that they can be.
For sure.
If you look back at Mouse, maybe Kerrigan did that with Robs at the time. He did with Frozen at the time. In the Mouse time, this was correct. Now you're looking at Vitality, and Apex had to definitely help Spinks like become the Spinks that he is now. It's not like just Spinks just appeared in a Vitality jersey and suddenly was a top 5 player in the world. No, he was great, but there was still a path to be kind of walked on. Same with Flames, same with Messi. There's work that needs to be put like into this project, and I use the term project carefully. Like, it's a project to help these players kind of get ready for S tier level. And also, I think this also plays for his agenda, is that you sort of had to get more out of your players than what they were just when they joined your roster. Because if Flames had remained OG Flames, and if Messi had just remained Fnatic Messi, I don't know if Vitality can win. Like, that required them being better than what they originally were And I think some of it, not all of it, of course, some of it has to be attributed to the leader. So, but it is a really interesting conversation to be had.
By the way, even if it was just as reductive as, the reason why it works with all these different players, Maniac, is they're not at all like, a team with a culture, and they just put like 5 players out there. Like you hear about some of the top football teams, and you just play and you just say, do your job. Even that would imply something about how he's calling must be good, because he'd be calling with a very basic structure, but you still got to know how to use your pieces. Like, the problem essentially I'm getting to is there's no real way to deny him, like you say. Like, I'm not going to actually have him as my winner, but he has to be in the conversation. There's no way to dismiss him in the way we have him with some of the other all-time great leaders if we just thought there was enough compelling reasons not to. Like, I think you just have to be in the mix. And also, I'll add in, because this was kind of a weird year and we did switch games, I do think some of these lists get a lot shorter than they would be if it was just a CSGO year. Like I say, the CS2 one sort of means you don't have to bother putting KD in it at the moment. Like, if anything, the question is he your number 3 or number 4? Like, no one's having his number 1, are they? So I'll tell you one, though. We're not trying to do every player in every category, but I'll tell you another category that had a player that tortures me, mate. It's spoiler, another ex-CIS region player, which by the way, just because politically they get upset, because Ukraine's technically not in the CIS anymore, even though we mean it as a region in the same way, Maniac, as I'd say like Belgian players are French. What I really mean is they just speak French, right? That's what everyone knows what I mean. The problem is you're supposed to now say like ex-CIS, but then that's going to get difficult if it's in Russia and so on. But anyway, you get what I mean by that. But this is the point I'm going to make, is this. The player who's a nightmare in the ARPA one, mate, is fucking good old James, isn't it?
I know.
Because here's the problem. There's another team which, like, if people don't know, now that ENCE is so good they qualify anyway, now it's VP's my team that really makes me upset at the Blast system, because it's like, they're just not enough teams get in, so they barely ever get to play in the Blasts. And as a result, the joke is, as you've seen here, James just always at those bloody challenger events from ESL. He's essentially at what it's supposed to be, like the old DreamHack Opens, but somehow now you've got a team that won the fucking major playing at these and winning them as well. So the problem is, it's like these are competitive lands. They have some good teams there, but it still isn't the same as, look, I might not be the biggest fan of Blast, but a final at Blast is way bigger stakes than ESL Challenger Atlanta. It just is, I'm sorry. Like, the country, the status, like the teams you're playing. And so the problem is, if you go and look, mate, just on the stats, Jim has had a fucking superlative year for who he is. Like, you can argue he's supposed to be his best as an AWPer, but I look at who you're playing and so, like, it doesn't really matter how good these numbers are. Like, I can't really give you the status as the AWPer of the year. Come on. I don't even know that I don't even think, I'm sorry that you even get him at like top 3 on this one, even though your numbers are nuts. Like, because think about it, we are talking about fucking Monacy and Shiro and fucking Sun Pai. These guys, like, I was complaining that fucking that Shiro doesn't play in enough semis. Well, Jim barely gets to play at the tournaments. Like, this is a tough one for me, because people know in the past I've been sort of a hater. I do think his game's very good now. It's just I want to actually see it against the top teams. Like, that's the number one wish you were here team for me, man. I just want them in the tournaments. Whether they win or lose, everyone knows like that they always present that really weird puzzle. I just want them in the mix every time. I need them in the field.
I agree with you, and he's a puzzling topic for this whole year, honestly. If you look at his numbers, then of course, as you say, the numbers are great, but you have to consider the context, like who he played against and what events was he at. And I mean, Katowice plays in his favor, like with outsiders, even though in itself it's not a great result, but it's still like a top 5, 6,
right.
so that sort of a quarterfinal. He's had amazing numbers in Katowice, but that's sort of the only moment where he really flirted with the highest of highest level. The RMR itself was a disappointment. Game result was a disappointment. So what do you make of really great numbers in a context that is obviously inferior to what the rest of the world is actually playing against, or the rest of the elite teams are playing against? So I put him in my top 20, but I almost immediately regretted it. As soon as I put him in, I almost immediately regretted it, and I could see all of the reasons why he shouldn't be there. I still think that the eye test for James and his quality as a player will put him in that category, and I also think that he's been pretty good at maintaining a high level individually while going through roster changes as well, like Fame coming in and all the changes they've had with VP. He just doesn't have the pedigree to go any higher than that. Like, I even think if people told me, Maniac, you're wrong, he should not be in the top 20, I wouldn't even be upset about it.
Right.
Like, I could see how me putting it in the top 20 is sort of a reach that is sort of based on what I know he's capable of doing against top 20. But this year, it almost feels like it's based on nostalgia more than anything else. But because he's so strong in the sort of tier 2 events that he goes to, it really gives you with a feeling of like, oh shit, like he's really still dominating. He's still extremely good. With reminder, as an IGL, right? He and Blamef, two of sort of like extraterrestrial that keep on destroying everybody as an IGL, which is something I consider as well. But it is a fact. He just does not and hasn't competed against the very best. There's a pro league, relatively low placings, but the stats are high. So I put in my top 20 almost against my own will. And, you mentioned AWP of the year. He's nowhere in that category. He's not even in the second ballot. Like, there's a first ballot, and there will be a second ballot underneath that one, and then he would probably come in there. I don't think you can argue against anything than that.
He also has a problem for me, which is I've always said he's the player where I can't tell if he's just some outlier, in which case it's not a problem because you can have an outlier and just ignore that from the general pattern, or if he actually is just the smoking gun that like the rating system of HLT has real problems. Because if people don't know, part of what allows Jim to get an exceptional rating is counterintuitive. So most people, if you think in Counter-Strike, the good player is the one who gets the most kills, right? Jim's move is to just die the least. That's what he does. So if you ever look, even when he has a rating where the number is bonkers, like he'll have a rating like a simple Zero tournament, but you'll look and it'll be like 0.7 kills per round. Like they would be like a 0.8 kills. Like they'd have like some bonkers, like gaudy numbers. His is more like he just never ever dies and he's very efficient with his kills. Right? Here's a reason why, even though this will sound counterintuitive, I actually think that makes you a worse player, because that's actually great for what James is doing, which is in his team, sometimes the player will be the star, will be like a Flit or a Fame. These are the ones who'll pop up. So if he just does his job in that sense and is efficient with an expensive gun, that works. The other players I'm talking about, like when I critique Shiro or Ziwu or fucking Monacy, when they have the AWP, they don't have an option to save and play safe. And then, I tell you what, like, well, who the fuck would Ziwu? I tell you what, I'll sit back and Flames. You just have to carry the whole tournament and win, and then we might win the event. No, the difference is, even if their numbers look less efficient or they're not, they're dying more, they're doing that as an exchange for being a superstar in the game and doing things that like break the round. Like one of the things I've always thought is also underrated is, it's like every kill isn't equal either. Like someone can have 20 kills in a game and have a very boring game. Or, and Jim obviously has done that many times, or you can have a round where like Monacy wins like a 1v3 that like 4 people in the world could even win. Like never mind attempt, just win. Like conceivably like hit that no. Because everyone knows, this is why I'm specifically using Monacy. Monacy does the simple shit, which by the way, my interview with him is ridiculous. Because when I ask Simple like how the fuck he aims that way with the AWP, this is where he is like a mad genius. He claims he invented that super flick style specifically so you can win clutches. Because obviously if you try it the really slow, like lining it up with the score, you're never going to win the clutch, are you? He claims that he actually did that so he could do that. Like, Monacy does that. Like, these are rounds that, like, they're worth more than just the kills. Like, there's just certain people can do that, certain people can't. There's not many of them. So my problem with James is just that, like, look, the eye test, as you say, is always going to be where it falls down. You're going to go watch his game. What you're going to see is some interesting decisions. He's going to hit a few really good shots, but not that many insane ones. And he's not going to do the Monacy things I'm talking about before. He's not going to have that round that breaks the whole game, or he's not going to have the one where he picks up a deagle and just 3Ks people out of nowhere and like, holy shit, the whole economic system's reversed. Like, what I like about him in some ways is he definitely does play to his character. Like it's like he knows the script he's being handed, but I don't think he even tries to be a superstar player. I don't think that's even how he sees the game. It's why actually, in some ways, if you notice, the two people I don't anymore critique is, I'm actually okay with both James and Katie and being primary AWP and IGL, because as you say, they've actually, if anything, suited their AWP game to their IGL job more than the other way around. Like, the difference is people do critique Blame F and go, but is he doing a good enough job as an IGL? I think those two guys, Jim and Kaden, do a great job as an IGL and a pretty good job as an AWPer. Like, I kind of don't have a problem with that. Like, it's just, if we're making it AWPer of the year, you don't get any points for being an IGL. It's just what you did with the gun, mate. And as you say, mate, there are some much better AWPers than Jim.
You're right.
I don't care what the numbers tell me.
The problem I have when you do the Kaden James comparison is I feel like, if you do the equation, like how many or how much resource is devoted to a player in order for him to kind of produce results on the server, it does feel like James is literally being set up all of the time.
Oh, sure.
Frag. All of the time. Any position, any setup, any financial decision, any tech, like tree or any branch on that tech tree is designed for James to deliver something. And you sometimes could sit down, look at his game and be like, why is he not doing more? Like, why is he not doing more? He's got all the setup, all the base and everything. Cadian a bit more selfless, I would say, in the approach. Like, he would give his life away at some point. So this is the one problem that I have with James sometimes. Is I understand he seems like a very cerebral guy who thinks about the game and sort of always knows what probability is most likely to happen, what is the scenario, what is the best course of action. I just wish sometimes he'd thrown away the rulebook a little bit more and just get stuck in here and there. I'm not asking him to completely change his DNA within the game. That's not going to happen. But just here and there, just go ahead and go on a limb, take a risk, put your life on the line, get committed in a round or two. You could be surprised because, if anything, maybe he is slightly underrated in terms of what we mechanically think he can do, because he never really puts himself in like simple-esque situations of clutches. Who knows? Maybe he could actually be able to have some.
I know what you wish you could see, mate. This is what we wish we could see. We wish there was a way, hypothetically, we could just drop. Essentially, let's just drop Jim into Monacy's spot and just have him.
Exactly.
Look, don't IGL, just take the shots. And in fact, don't even worry about saving. It's okay to die. Just basically go for the shot. Exactly. Kind of shows what you're capable of. Because I actually wonder the same thing, Maniac. When I look at his game is phenomenal, but it's so like structured around what he wants to do, decision making. But I'd actually have a hard time telling you, mate, how good is he mechanically with the op? I'm not really sure. Because I have always thought, by the way, it's actually why I think Device is a master with the weapon. I do think that the op is largely, except for rare people like Simple, it is mainly about setup. It's about understanding where they're going to come from and where you hang, how far off the wall you put the crosshair. Do you rescope immediately? Do you pull back and take another shot? These are the things that make like an AWP consistent. So like Jim can do these things, but the problem is essentially what happens if he did try to be like Simple and just kill everyone with the AWP? What would happen then, right? So it's an interesting what if, I'll tell you. I mean, part of me wonders, because we're going to sort of see this with Shiro. We're going to see Shiro on a completely different team without any of those teammates to see what is he like as a player? Will he play different? Will he be better? By the way, maybe he'll now smurf and be a top 20 player if the spirit isn't good. The thing is though, with Jim, it looks like he's never tried to do that though. That's the other thing that's so strange about this guy. He's somehow gotten, I'll give him mad credit. Think about how long ago that fucking Starland of Berlin was. That was in 2019. He's got a pretty good fucking career out of this really weird saving style, hasn't he? Like, I can't even remember. I always forget this as well. He's won a fucking major, and he was the MVP of it. Like, I used to think he was a meme. I've got to give it up to him. He actually, in his own way, he's sick, even though he is boring as fuck. Like, look, I know. Don't ever put me on his team. But I'll tell you what, if I get good odds, I'll bet on VP a lot of the time, boys.
I know. I've went heavy on VP quite a few times because I knew when I was getting out of it. But man, yeah, we do forget he's a major winner. Damn, like,
it's crazy, isn't it, when you think of that?
Yeah, he might be one of the most misjudged player there is out there, and I'm guilty of that too. It's like I'm guilty of it too. Maybe
like someone make like a meme compilation where it's like all the craziest Nico moments, and then it's like Nico 0 majors. Then just show loads of clips of Jim like saving at the end of half. You know what I mean? When he like doesn't even go for it, dude. He'll even do that shit where you save because you have like the armor on the pistol round. You know what I mean? Like
I know,
one of our biggest pet peeve. Just show that and they'll be like Jim MVP of a major, like because it'll just be so absurd. The contrast is too much for me. I can't. By the way, that's where you realize how actually strong the mental fortitude of the superstar players are. Because that would actually drive me crazy if I was Nico. If I'm thinking about that, like, wait a minute. Nob and Jim have a major, but I haven't got shit like. I don't know if I could live with that. You know what I mean? That's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, bro. He definitely he did. I feel like he did what he had to do in order to get the best out of his lineups at the time. But now I almost feel like I feel like with this VP, this should be more.
Don't you think with the firepower they have? Like, here's the thing: you don't have to abandon the style, but you can open it up a bit more. Surely, you know what I mean?
There should be more. Like, if you have Flit, if you have Fame, like you have a trio that's really, really strong. Like I don't know. Maybe I'm just mad because I haven't really seen much of them. And so I am a little bit negatively biased against VP. But come on, man. Like, please. Like, I'm really looking forward to the beginning of 2024. Because I agree. I feel like the first few months or the last month of 23 is like a transition period. But I feel like now we're set. Like, now, like 2024 is coming up. The RMRs are coming up. It's not time to make roster changes or anything. Like, you have the lineup that you have. Get set, ready, go. And at that game, I wish VP can be a little bit more present at the top. Oof, next year is going to be spicy.
I have a question for you, which is actually, related to the Blast World Finals, because the team I actually want to ask about, it's funny that everyone just focused on the big names, like Vitality won with Mezzi, FaZe had Frozen, they got to the final, but they lost. The actual team I want to ask about is G2, mate. Because here's the problem. There's all this drama still, like, we're still essentially like digesting and processing this whole JKS move as more details leak out. My problem is this. Like, I don't hate on Nexa, but I do think, like, it's a downgrade from what they had with JKS. Like, I mean, I think people saw some of the stats. Like, the amount of, like, fucking clutches JKS wins is absurd, mate. Like, that, you can't just take that out of your team and expect you're going to get the same results. Like, think how many rounds you're just stealing away from the opponent there. Like, remember, these, mostly when we say clutches, we also mean, like, 1v2s and stuff. Like, these are the rounds you're not supposed to win. So my problem is not like the next end of the equation. I'm sure he's okay. But when I saw them at this tournament, mate, this already showed me why I'm a bit concerned for G2. Because I think if you look at the year, they are one of the teams where actually if you look at the results of the team and you were to make a graph, it makes perfect sense. When they do have 2 or 3 players all pop off at once, they can win even big tournaments like prestige events. But if that doesn't happen, dude, their consistency is terrible for this team. Like, they're a team where, like, they might even be in, like, quarterfinals or semi and just straight up lose and just not even look good. And this tournament was a killer, because if people don't know, there was this weird detail where it turns out on the last round of what would have been the end of the group stage series between FaZe and G2, Nico could actually have just defused that bomb.
Did he actually have? Is that a fact?
I mean, I'm saying this based on what people already, like, timed out. Like, I'd have to go on the server and check myself, so I won't say it's a fact. But put it this way, it sounded plausible, because as far as I know, Maniac, it was that thing where, like, if you don't use the music sound and you just do it in your head, he could have missed it by, like, a slight part, and essentially he thought, like, I'm dead anyway, so it's OT. But essentially, if it's true that he could have done that, that would actually won the series and they would have got top 4 guaranteed, whereas instead they obviously lost in the round of 6 or whatever you call it, right? The problem with that is that also just shows you why I have concerns about this G2, which is, I think by doing the Nexa JKS swap, you have put so much more pressure on people like the Monacies of the world, the Hunters of the world. You're going to have even more big tournaments now, because, like I say, the reason why I've always been a skeptic of Huxley is because, unfortunately, there's one area, as much as it's sort of like, you're not actually seeing what they do directly. You're seeing, like, the absence of it. I've always thought it's actually when sometimes your players play bad that you see what an IGL can do. Like, think about that, like, the fucking Asian CSGO championship that FaZe won. A bunch of their players were a bit shaky that tournament, but they still won the tournament. That tells me, like, Carrigan must really have done his job. You know, he's gotten the absolute worst out of people. Like, the problem I have in this scenario is, like, I feel like this is where, if ever Huxley's going to get exposed, it's going to be with this lineup. Like, I'm kind of worried about this team, mate. Like, if I look at this G2, do they win tournaments? Like, look, you've got a few players who could be the MVP of a tournament, but do you win them? I don't know. I'm a bit concerned about G2, man. I don't really know where the hell this squad's going, because even when they were hinting at this Nexa move, I didn't genuinely understand. Is this supposed to be like a permanent move? Like, is this just the team? Or is it like, you know, he joins because you know him to wait and see, I don't know, contract ends in 2 months and someone else is coming? Because, like, you know, those are the stories that are out there. Look, as far as I know, Madden never was joining G2. But it's not plus, like, I'd imagine they want him. It seems like the player they'd want. So where are you at on G2 as a squad? Because, like, I don't want to hate on them after one tournament, but I always already thought personally this team was sort of like just fragging out anyway. I was never really a big fan of the style of play, you know.
So the only one protecting factor or in their favor is that was only one event so close to Nexa joining. That's why I have to be a little bit careful with how critical I want to be. I think the premise of my answer would be, I also do believe that this Nexa joining is just a move in a streak of moves that should happen. Right. There is no way someone can make a convincing argument enough that this is the final lineup and it makes sense and it is an upgrade. I don't believe it is. I believe there might be some other factors coming into play, but pound for pound, JKS is a better player than Nexa. That's the way I see it, and that's coming from an outside perspective. I'm not within the server. I'm not within TeamSpeak. Now, individually at this event, unfortunately, Nexa did not make a case for himself. He did not make a case for himself that he could be better than what we thought. That way, we are underestimating him, or we are overestimating JKS and what he was doing. I mean, you're looking at a guy who's unfortunately in the deciding series where they get eliminated has less frags than Huxley. And in itself, that's pretty telling. Like, it's okay for Huxley to have that kind of... If we assume that he's got the game plan and he's got the very selfless positions and he gives away his life a lot in some of these duels, it somewhat is a bit more excusable for Huxley to have that kind of production, and we've been through it already. That's not the case for your anchor. It just isn't. So individually, I think that's problematic on side of Nexa, and I'm going to put the asterisk of that's one event, maybe a little bit uncomfortable with some of the positions he's got to play, get used to whatever it is. I will extend him a grace period for sure, and I won't be too harsh after this one thing. But in itself, World Final is all that G2 encapsulates, which is a day on a high even FaZe could lose. Who knows? FaZe is 1 second away from losing to G2, and
Yeah.
they go straight to semifinal. And we all know what Nico can do on a server. We all know what Monesi can do on a server. Hunter, which, by the way, somehow avoids criticism when he himself has
weird, isn't it?
slowed down big time.
Yep.
I am a big Hunter fan, so I can have the level of demands and sort of ask more from him. But anyway, we know what some of these players can do, which mean on a good day, nobody is safe. And I don't even think Vitality is safe. If like you get Nico on a good day and Monesi on a good day, they steamroll you with the calling style of Huxley. Yeah, they can beat Vitality. But you also get the other side of it, which is a G2 that is never really fully in control of a series, where 1 or 2 stupid rounds unravel the whole machinery. And it happened against Navi as well. Very good start. Then there is a stupid ass whatever clutch that they lose 2v5. And then from this point on, they lose 4 rounds in a row. So this was always what G2 was about this year. Do I think this is going to change now that Nexa came in for JKS? No, I don't think so. I think this is going to remain true for G2. It's going to remain the case that there will be Terrifying to play against on a good day, and nobody's ever going to be happy to face G2. But I will never, or currently, I will never have them as a safe bet where I can tell you for sure, yeah, they're going to make semis, that's for sure. We know what we get from G2, strong map pool. That's just not the case. And World Finals sort of replicated that kind of state. And the only again, protecting factor or mediating factor is that it was the first event with Nexa. But if anything, it told me what I already knew, or it showed me what I already suspected.
By the way, I definitely agree on the Hunter point. I've noticed he is the only player in the lineup that gets no criticism. Because, by the way, there are some people who hate on Monesi. There's some people who hate on Nico. That's just a thing. Obviously, Huxley gets his own fair share. If people didn't like the Richard Lewis angle, maybe they hate JK. Hunter is the only player. Look, he is a super nice guy. He never does badly. But at the same time, I do think, by the way, that because he was like, I think he won like MVP from HLTV for Katowice, mate, he fucking dined out on that. Like, I'll tell you one thing, a little detail people might not know. He was one of the fucking Player of the Year nominees.
Yeah.
For that esports award. Like, and that's how I know they were just thinking of Katowice only. Because, like, for the rest of the year, I remember telling people, like, what's fucking Rob? Where's Rob? So what are we doing here? Like, there's no universe when like, you already had Nico on the list as well. It's not Nico and Hunter, for fuck's sake. Like, so yeah, I think the Hunter one's like, that's why I say it. It's not just like Nexa, you have to be as good as Jake. No, Hunter. If you were in favour of this move, mate, it's time for you to step up. You need to show me more. Because, yeah, I'll summarise it this way, Maniac. When they're on their game, like when they've had these streaks, they've won the big prestige events, yeah, obviously they can look really strong and they can frag the fuck out you. But I don't believe teams are scared of G2, mate. Like, I don't think that people go in and there's... Because you know the thing about... What makes you scared of a team isn't, like, knockout power like they have. It's the idea that, like, it's always going to be a hard game. Like, think about the old Virtus Pro, the Polish one. Mate, even if you're actually better than them, man, it's going to be fucking hard, though. They're going to make it really difficult. And I tell you what, they're not going to make it easy. They're going to do things you don't expect. They're going to hang around in rounds where you think you're ahead, or you win the clutch, you think, right, I'll get a breather now. Maybe you don't. Maybe they're running with Tech 9s and kill you. Like, the difference with G2 is G2 has, like, that mode where they're on a streak and they're really hot, but mate, when it goes off, I'm not scared of this team at all. Like, and as we're talking about, all the big star players will have a random period, which is why they get criticised, where they just have a bad game. They'll just have a series that just goes off, you know?
Yeah, and this is where we can circle back to like the Huxley conversation as a leader and the Apex conversation as a leader, is that whenever a team is in a low point during a game, and I'm talking mid-series, this is a very good indicator of the true value of both the individuals and the structure that they have in. Because a very, very strong team is going to grind its way back to a better scenario when people feel a bit more relaxed and, okay, let's get the communication going on. But I feel like sometimes in G2, it's very apparent that it is overly reliant on a few individuals, and that the play style in itself is not strong enough to kind of gift you a free round or two that then will create this momentum and then will give you this better sort of atmosphere where you can start to play again. I haven't really seen G2 do that. For G2, it's just about, can they take control? Do they have the upper hand in the game? And if they do, I'll give that to Huxley. He knows how to play a snowbally Counter-Strike. He really knows. Whenever he's got the game, when he's got the game by the horns, like, he knows what to do, how fast to play, how to change the rhythm of the game, what bomb sites to hit, and when. He's very good at anticipating what the losing team against him is going to do next, what should be the adaptation, this is what I'm going to do there. He's got a really good eye for it, which is why I think I rate him as an IGL not that low at all. But then when everything goes to hell, then you have to be either relying on more than one individual to save you out of it, or to a sound play style, a couple of tricks here and there, a couple of protocols that's going to help you have free rounds. And I don't think G2 have that quite yet. And that exposes them a little bit.
Like, this is pure speculation when I say this, by the way. Like, I actually have never, I don't think I've ever, I think I did like a snake and banter with Huxley, but it's not anyone I've ever picked his brain off, talked about how he calls the game or whatever. I might actually, since he's interested, I might actually reach out to some of the like teammates and coaches he's had and stuff and ask like some questions. Because the problem I have is this. Essentially, I actually think that if I had to speculate what Huxley's calling style is like, I think it explains both why they have these big tournaments they win, but also why they don't have what we're talking about, Maniac, like a safety net where he can sort of call a game that's a different style. I get the sense that the reason why you never have even privately, by the way, I've never heard people shit talking Huxley. I haven't heard stories that like Nico doesn't like him. I haven't heard any of those things from my normal source network. And so my suspicion then is that he's sort of like a players in-game leader, that, you know, he like essentially he's very open to input from the players. Like, how do you want to play? What do you want to do? Now, look, that means when you play to what a player wants, that when they're feeling their game, they're going to look fucking sick. They're going to be awesome. It's why star players tend to demand that. But the problem is, I do think there are times, and in my opinion, all the great in-game leaders, go down the list I just gave you, Carrigan, Snappy, they're having Cadian, they're having moments where they're not just asking the player, what do you want to do? Like, they're going like, essentially, here's what we're going to do. Like, look, actually, in this moment, essentially, I'll take the reins back. Maybe you aren't feeling your game. Maybe it's not working for you. Maybe you're getting countered. So, you know what? Like, trust me, essentially. I'm going to call this, and this is what we're going to do to get back in the game. That's where I wonder if Huxley has that dimension. Like, again, pure speculation. I can't actually know. Maybe I heard the comms. Maybe he's a Galaxy B. Maybe he's talking all the time. But I just suspect when I look at, like, the dynamics of the team, I look at when they succeed, when they don't. That's just a concern I have. And by the way, that's not to say that's a bad style. Like, the joke is, if you look at Nico's career, maybe that is what Nico wants, because I've always said Nico's problem is this. One, I just don't think it's appropriate for him to be the in-game leader. And so then two, I do think that Nico individually is so smart in the game, he probably should have total free reign. But I think the flaw of a player like that is his ideal setup might be that everyone does what they want, but maybe everyone else isn't Nico, you know what I mean? Maybe they do need a bit of reins, a bit of structure, times to be told, just do this orderly.
And this is where it is the IGL's foremost responsibility and duty to make sure that when your star player is feeling it, his input is kind of taken into consideration, that you use that. But your IGL will never have a full bird's eye view vision of what's happening in the game. Like, maybe he has an idea of what's happening in his area. Maybe he's got a couple of strategies that he could call. Maybe that's going to work out. But you as an IGL, you have to keep that overview of what's happening in the game, what's the financial situation. Like, your star player will have moves, but like, Apex has already told me sometimes, like, Zywo will come to me with ideas, and I'm just like, what do you mean? Like, no, we shouldn't do that right now.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that his idea was bad. It's just in the context of the game and what's happening right now. This is not what we should be doing right here. And so this is where, as an IGL, you have to be this filter where you let in information, you let in output coming in, or input coming in rather, and then you make the decisions. And then we judge you based on these decisions. That's how the game is. That's how fair it is. I think another dimension that we can only see from the outside, and it's a whole lot of speculations because we would have to be in the team speak and kind of a fly on the wall, is also how both calm and lucid your IGL remain when everything goes to shit. Because that, I think, is extremely important. And this is where I think Apex made a whole journey, because Apex used to be, like, if people aren't really familiar, Apex used to be extremely emotional to the point where he would actually get very mad, profoundly mad and frustrated. And that was when he was a player, and that was also the case when he was the leader at the beginning of Vitality. There will be moments where you watch Vitality play, and you can almost feel the anger in Apex, and you can feel that he's losing vision of the game. Like, the calls don't really make sense. They're impatient. They're stubborn. Things are going to hell, and you can see it. I feel like he has learned to sort of express that frustration, but remain in control of what he is doing and what he's saying and what the team is doing. There was a moment, I don't know if you've seen it, but during War Final, there was a very interesting moment where Vitality is in the losing position on Inferno. I can't remember if it's the semifinal or the final. I think it's the semifinal. They're losing position in Inferno. They win a round, and after they win the round, Apex goes on like a rage for like 15 seconds. We said, like, listen, guys, you gotta listen to me. Like, we have to do this retake together. Listen to me. And even though they won, like, he found this moment with a whole lot of intensity to kind of tell his teammates, like, hey, listen, what we're doing now, it's not okay. Like, we're not playing the game we're supposed to play. Like, focus on me, guys. I don't think Apex a year and a half ago or 2 years ago was capable of doing that. I think he would have been taken hostage by his own emotion, completely blabbered his way, waffled his way through rage and frustration, and you lose your teammates. Not every IGL knows how to handle that. How to handle, like, hey, what the fuck is happening on the server right now? But you are the IGL. You cannot be the conduit of frustration. If you fall victim to frustration and you lose track of what's happening, it's over. The game is over. You're never coming back. So I think Apex is very capable of that. When I see G2 play, I can sometimes feel Hooks' frustration. I don't know how he handles it. I don't know how he personally handles moments where obviously people are making mistakes, rounds are going to shit, we're losing clutches, we're not defusing them, but whatever you want to say. I don't know how he handles it and what kind of image he then gives to the rest of the team. Like, guys, I'm in control. Like, it's okay. It's going to be all right. That is something I don't know. It would be interesting to get inputs as well from the teammates or himself on that some point.
I'll tell you one angle, though, that I actually have. It's totally irrelevant to this, but it's a side topic about Apex. One thing I actually do love, though, and you've seen it a lot this year, like the big standout moments, obviously, when he won the major and he said about, like, you know, everyone sort of talking shit about how he's not a good in-game leader or whatever, like, then go fuck themselves. He's done that the whole year, guys. Like, if you notice, one thing I like is, if people ever saw that classic The Last Dance, the documentary about Michael Jordan, one of the very interesting things about Michael Jordan's personality is because he really was, like, the best basketball player ever, he had to artificially find ways to get himself going every game, because he knew in some regular season game, like, well, I've already won the championship, been the MVP, like, this regular season game isn't really life or death. So he would make it life or death Maniac by actually just trying to find an angle by which he, like, a storyline basically. So he would try and find something the opposing star player said or coach. And the joke is, he even eventually just got so good at doing this, he would take things that were obviously a compliment, but then, like, for example, like, there's a coach famously said that Michael Jordan was just really good at sort of like winning over the other players, and as a result he sort of cons him because he makes him be his friend. And so this guy, like, he just had as an excuse, he just like dropped 50 against that team next to him. But it's like, in a way, he's not really dissing you there, is he? He's saying you have like charisma and social skills and you're great at basketball. But his point was, as a way to make himself go, he essentially acted like the guy said, you all you do is talk and you shit at basketball, so to prove myself. Apex does that. Like, if you notice, he not only does his own narratives, he does vitality narratives, like, will they win without Zonic? He does like, oh, Extaz, did people say he's good or bad? Oh, Flamesy and Metzy and new players, people thought they were. He just finds any angle he can. And by the way, not only do I think that's a dope narrative, just making his actual storyline way cooler. It's like a sort of soap opera, reality TV framing to his narrative. But I've actually heard stories, and dude, it sounds like this is common. This is an area where, you know, when people will say, well, the main reason Apex can't be IGL of the year is he's got Ziwu. Bro, have you heard half the stories? It sounds like Apex understands, and a whole bunch of the legendary players have told me this, NBK, fucking Shocks. They all say when you're in a team with Apex, actually the problem is sometimes that he's too unselfish. And like the joke is, you know that story when they were at PGL Stockholm and they were getting banged out in like the fucking Swiss system, where supposedly Apex just said to Ziwu, like, mate, we're just going to be out of the tournament if you don't do something soon. Like, that might sound like just a stupid comment. Like, I get the vibe actually, like I say, I think Ziwu's problem sometimes is he doesn't think of himself as the best player in the world, or like, I'm trying to battle simple for the all-time great. Sometimes I think actually someone like Apex might be the guy who lights a fire under him and says, mate, there's only you can do this now. Like, we've got to give you the gun and we've got to get going. Like, take the AWP, you know, we'll play this side out. Like, tell me if you need a flash or something. Like, that's actually something where, one, that means some of the Ziwu performances, a bit of that counts for Apex too. He's helping channel that, as it were. And then, as I say, I actually like, by the way, I never critiqued KD in doing this in Heroic. My problem in Heroic was just I felt like the other players didn't like that vibe. I don't think they liked feeling like they were the villain or there was pressure on the match. Like, I actually think KD in doing it was great for the fucking on-camera shit. It was amazing. So I actually think that's an interesting element of Apex's personality too. Like, normally, like, you know, aside from the Kassad thing, Huxley doesn't really brag about like he's the best IGL. He just quietly does his job and tries to win tournaments, right? Apex actually is sort of like, he's trying to directly engage anyone who thinks he isn't the best all the time. And if he ever gets a win over you, he'll fucking let you know. I think that's dope, though. It's actually really cool in its own way, you know.
It is, and I also think it's great that he waited to have the results to back it up. Like, if you go back to 2021 or 22, he didn't have that shit talk.
No, he didn't. You're right.
I think he was. Whenever you talk with Apex, he's very clairvoyant about like when did they fail, what should they have done, like why did they lose this game. Like, for example, you could always talk to him about like the comeback against Liquid in Katowice where they fuck up that situation overpass. Right. You can talk to him about like the fuck up in quarterfinal in Pro League. Like, he knows about him. Like, he's very aware of like when did they mess up, when did they fuck up. And I think that's why whenever he decides to have that kind of braggadocio about him, like there is a reason why. Like, he's got the results, you know, I like the character, and he's turning into a leader of men. Right? I think he's really turning into one of these few characters that now personify what it is to be a captain and people can look up to. And, this guy's going to lead you into battle. Like, he's really becoming that. And on the ZywOo note as well, you're right. I think it's a very complicated topic to approach because instinctively, the first thought you have in your mind would be to say, wait, hold on a minute. If you play with ZywOo, you benefit from it. That's it. That's unilateral. Like, there's no back and forth. You are the benefactor of playing with ZywOo. You should thank the gods of Counter-Strike that ZywOo's been by your side for 5 years, and you should make sure that you pray every evening and morning that it keeps happening again. Like, open your mind to the possibility of what Apex might have been doing along these 5 years to maybe help. You can argue, of course, get to where ZywOo would obviously almost always have ended because of how incredible he is, and I'm not trying to make a case against that, but like, consider the work of the people around him to help him reach whatever status, whatever level he's on. And like, Apex has played with ZywOo his entire professional career. ZywOo's been with Apex. He was the first guy that he joined the team with in Vitality. He's the only one that stayed throughout all these years. So yeah, I like that you mentioned that. Like, let's be open to the idea that maybe Apex participated in helping ZywOo reach his full potential. Whatever word you want to use to that idea of like, eventually you get to that point. He's been with him for 5 years. So maybe it's not just a one-way street. Like, I'm not saying it's a 50-50. Let's not be crazy. But maybe there is some sort of flowers that can be thrown towards Apex in that whole topic.
I have one last topic, so we'll just make this up at the end. Basically, I'll do a whole video myself on my side, on my Thorin's channel, etc. Obviously not the last Radiation one, but I wanted to just get your take on it. So one of the big last second 11th hour turning narratives was obviously this Falcons one. Like, they went from everyone, even though I'd warned people, did I not warn everyone on Twitter and on shows? I told you all not to jump the gun on this one, because as I pointed out, the problem was the Falcons themselves never did this messaging that everyone claimed of, like, they're going for a super team, it's going to be the best players ever, they're giving everyone the bag and everyone's getting, like, that's actually something we ourselves use speculation, and we sort of built out and inferred. We reverse engineered that Cos they're getting Zonic, that's what they're doing. Cos Vegas is joining, Cos Snappy, Cos Nico. What? But first of all, they never said they were. But I tell you what, in the end, they're not too far off, are they, guys? Aren't they just like 1-star rifler from having bait? The joke is they are just Nico. If Nico was in Boris's spot, haven't they just made the team that we're all just laughed at them for the last month for not making? Like, because they ended up with that whole thing of like, they got Madden and Sunpies. They've actually sort of like ended up with a lineup that was gone from like, are they even going to be relevant to like, wouldn't you just want to watch them play tomorrow if there was a LAN? Like, so I want to get your take. What do you think of this lineup, Maniac? What are your first thoughts when you hear it?
I agree with you that this was a very last minute sort of U-turn in the entire Falcon story, because we went from, well, Falcons is going to miss this major cycle. Let's see what they can do for the second one. And then by the time maybe they will put together a lineup that's competitive, to hold on a minute. If you do the meme with the glasses, it's kind of like just a remix of ENCE. Like, that's what we're looking at. It's the core of ENCE with Boros and with Magisk. And that's kind of the conversation. Like, okay, Boros, I still think is definitely on trial. Not on trial for the team, on trial for public opinion and like what he's capable of doing. Hasn't really delivered on all the hype that we created with him in Monty. You can argue he maybe didn't have the team around him. Whatever the reason is, he's very much on trial. Magisk is a direct upgrade. Magisk is an incredible sign. And then the rest is basically the ENCE core. So now you not only have, I think, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think they have a direct invite to like the Cold Squad Priority RMR, or maybe
they have 3 of the players, so as far as I know, they get the spot, yes.
Exactly, so because they have the core. So now they're in a very decent position to be directly into the first cycle of majors this year, which is a win in itself. And if Boros, and that's a big if, it's not just going to be a small if, it's a capital if Boros was actually to deliver on some of the promises that we've seen in Monty, with the rest of the core, like this is a top team almost immediately. And I think that Magisk can plug in and be strong almost immediately. Like, I don't think Magisk needs 3 months to warm up to whatever they're doing, and this is going to be your spot, and you're going to need this. No, I think he's so strong that he's going to be delivering immediately. Boros really is the question. And I will say though, I think Sunpies' transition from CSGO to CS2 has been more complicated than what we might think about. Because of all the changes, we've given him a whole lot of leeway, and he's playing with a stand-in, and we don't know what's going to happen. I think his transition has low-key been way more complicated than we talk about. So I'm going to keep my eye on Sunpies and see how he delivers in 2024, because I personally rate him quite highly. But honestly, this is immediately a team that's a top 10 contender, almost on paper. And they got away with a very, very good signing towards the very end. This could have been catastrophic.
Like, all I'll say to close the episode is I actually think, considering a lot of people complained in CS2 like I did, that either people had stand-ins or you just knew the roster was changing. I mean, even when we thought Nico was leaving, it's just sort of like you thought, who cares about G2 results? The cool thing is, at the end of the year, with the Falcons and the Liquid signings, mate, the scene looks way healthier for the next year. Like, already, it's not just going to be FaZe and Vitality. You can really immediately have, hopefully, 4 or 5 teams that can all mix it up for the title. So I actually think, even though it came, like I say, at the 11th hour, actually, they sort of saved the top end of CS2 at the moment. So I'm super hyped for these lineups. Like, I can't know how good specifically the Falcons one is, but it's certainly very curious, though. It gets my attention. Like I say, I don't know how the Boros one works out, but I think, like you, look, I'd rather have Nerds than Boros, but I'll tell you what, I'd also rather have Megas than Diha. So,
that's true.
You know what I mean? When I'm waiting, and also, here's the one factor no one thinks about with that team. I'll leave you on this note. We're all just forgetting the whole Lars Robel and Zonic factor. Like, Snappy didn't have those guys before. Like, Saw did a good job with those lineups. I don't know beyond that how Saw. In fact, that's even the interesting thing. I even think dividing Sappy and Saw and put them in different teams is quite interesting. Let's see who does what, right? Let's see who can replicate some of that success. So yeah, we'll just leave it at that.